The wind carried the faint smell of gasoline through the open doors of the pristine workshop. Chrome gleamed under bright white lights, and the polished floor reflected the shapes of machines worth more than most people's homes. At the far end of the room, a deep metallic blue Aston Martin sat silently, its hood open like a wounded bird's wing. Lucas Grant leaned against a sleek black desk in the corner, one hand in his tailored pocket, the other holding an untouched cup of espresso. His dark eyes watched the car with quiet amusement. At 38, Lucas had built an empire from nothing but sheer ambition, turning his private garage into a fortress for the city's most expensive toys. He wasn't just known for his wealth, he was known for being untouchable, unshakable, and impossibly arrogant. When the sound of cautious footsteps echoed on the marble floor, Lucas glanced up. The receptionist appeared in the doorway, her voice hesitant. "Sir, there's someone here asking about the job." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Experience?" The receptionist hesitated. "She says she has plenty." His smirk deepened. "Send her in." Moments later, a young woman stepped into the room. She was in her late 20s, dressed in faded work overalls that had been washed so many times they were nearly gray. A leather tool belt hung at her side, worn but cared for, and her boots carried the scuffs of real labor. Her hands bore faint oil stains that soap never quite removed. She stopped a few feet from him and stood tall. "My name is Claire Dawson," she said evenly. "I heard you're looking for someone who can handle the toughest repairs." Lucas studied her like she was some rare curiosity. "That depends on your definition of tough," he said. "This garage isn't for basic tune-ups or fixing flat tires. These machines," he gestured lazily toward the row of gleaming supercars, "are worth more than most people's lifetimes." "I know exactly what they're worth," Claire replied, her voice steady. "And I know how to fix them." A quiet laugh escaped Lucas's lips. "Do you?" He set the untouched cup on the desk and straightened, walking toward her with deliberate slowness. "Tell you what," he said at last, stopping just inches away. "There's a car here that even my best team can't figure out. It's a complete mystery. If you can fix it." He let the words hang in the air, a spark of mischief lighting his gaze. "I'll marry you." The room went still. Even the faint hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. Claire didn't flinch, didn't laugh, didn't even blink. "Deal," she said simply. Lucas tilted his head, amused at her lack of hesitation. "Confident, aren't you?" "Determined," she corrected. Without another word, she walked past him toward the Aston Martin. The soft clink of her boots on the marble echoed in the silence. From the glass wall of the adjacent workshop, several mechanics had stopped what they were doing to watch, their expressions a mix of curiosity and doubt. Claire reached the car, resting her hand on the cool metal of the hood. She leaned in, eyes scanning the intricate tangle of wires and components as if she were reading a language only she understood. Lucas stood back, arms crossed, convinced this would end the same way it always did, with disappointment. But Claire wasn't looking for quick fixes. She was listening, not to Lucas's words or the weight of the bet, but to the silent story the machine was telling her. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a memory flickered, an old garage in her hometown, her father's voice guiding her hands when she was just a child. "Don't just look," he used to say. "Feel what it's trying to tell you." Her jaw tightened. She was here for more than a job. This was her chance to prove to herself that the years of closed doors, skeptical looks, and underestimated skills had all been leading here. Lucas checked his watch, hiding the faintest trace of interest behind a wall of indifference. He had given dozens of mechanics the same challenge over the past 3 weeks. None had come close, and yet, watching Claire work, he felt the smallest crack in his certainty. She asked for nothing but a flashlight and her own tools. Her hands moved with precision, her brow furrowed in thought, and every so often, she'd pause, close her eyes, and simply listen. The other mechanics exchanged glances. Patrick, the eldest of them, whispered, "She's wasting her time. It's impossible." But Claire's voice, low and sure, cut through the murmurs. "Nothing's impossible." Lucas almost smiled, and then, just as the clock on the wall ticked past the first hour, a faint sound broke the silence. The engine gave a slow, hesitant turn. Every head in the workshop lifted, Claire's fingers tightened on the ignition, her lips pressed together in concentration. Lucas straightened from the desk. The sound came again, stronger this time, followed by a low, steady purr. The Aston Martin's headlights flickered to life, spilling golden light across the floor. For the first time in years, Lucas Grant didn't have anything to say. Claire stepped back, wiping her hands on a rag. Her eyes met his across the room, calm but unyielding. "So," she said softly, "where do we go to get the marriage license?" Lucas didn't answer her right away. He simply stood there, the faint hum of the Aston Martin filling the room like a stubborn echo. His dark eyes studied Claire with a mix of disbelief and something he couldn't quite name. The other mechanics had gone silent, their smirks replaced by the stunned expressions of men who just watched the impossible happen. Claire didn't wait for applause. She packed her tools with the same calm precision she'd used to fix the engine. The rag she'd been using to wipe her hands now carried faint streaks of oil, a mark of work well done. "You're not staying to celebrate?" Patrick finally asked, stepping forward. "I'm not here for celebrations," Claire replied, her voice even. "I'm here for the job I came for." Lucas finally moved, his polished shoes clicking against the marble as he approached. "Do you know how many people have tried and failed to fix that car?" he asked, his tone smooth but edged. "Enough to make you think it couldn't be done," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. Something shifted in his expression, a flash of irritation mixed with respect. "You don't even know what that engine's worth." Claire's lips curved faintly. "I know exactly what it's worth, but I also know what it's worth to prove yourself to someone who's already decided you can't." Her words landed like a challenge. The room seemed to shrink, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Lucas had made his bet thinking she'd fail, just like everyone before her. Now she stood there, having won, and she wasn't asking for permission to belong. He turned away abruptly, as if breaking the stare was the only way to keep his composure. "Follow me," he said over his shoulder. The walk from the main workshop to his private office felt longer than it was. The mechanics whispered behind them, their voices low but excited. Patrick muttered something about her being the real deal, and Ryan replied, "Yeah, but let's see how long she lasts here." Inside the office, the air smelled faintly of leather and cedar. A wall of glass overlooked the workshop below, giving Lucas the perfect vantage point to watch everything that happened in his domain. He gestured toward a chair, but Claire remained standing. "You're not going to sit?" he asked. "I prefer standing," she replied. "Easier to leave if I don't like what I hear." That earned her a quiet chuckle. "You've got a sharp tongue." "I've got sharp skills," she countered. He leaned against his desk, folding his arms. "You want the job? Fine. But this isn't just about fixing cars. My clients expect perfection. One mistake, and you're done." "I've made mistakes before," Claire said. "The difference is, I don't make the same one twice." For a moment, there was silence. Then Lucas tilted his head slightly, as if trying to read the history behind her calm eyes. "Where did you learn to work like that?" Claire hesitated, her gaze drifting briefly toward the floor-to-ceiling window. "From someone who believed in fixing more than just machines," she said quietly. "He believed in fixing people, too." There was something in her tone, not sadness exactly, but a weight, as if the memory she carried was both a gift and a burden. Lucas didn't push for details, but he filed the information away. Over the next week, Claire was tested in ways she hadn't expected. She wasn't given easy jobs. She was thrown into the hardest, most frustrating work the garage had. Rare imports with obscure issues. Luxury engines so delicate that one wrong turn of a wrench could cause damage worth thousands. She worked long hours without complaint, her focus unbroken even when the others doubted her. And they did doubt her. On her third day, Ryan deliberately forgot to leave the specialized tool she needed for a repair, forcing her to improvise. On her fifth day, Ethan questioned every decision she made, hovering over her shoulder like a shadow. Claire didn't rise to the bait. She let her work speak for itself. But Lucas was watching. From the glass office, he studied her the way one might study a rare piece of art, trying to figure out what made it different from the rest. It wasn't just her skill, it was the way she carried herself. The quiet certainty that even when the odds were stacked against her, she wouldn't back down. One evening, long after the rest of the crew had gone home, Lucas found her in the far corner of the workshop, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, working on a vintage Maserati. The radio played softly in the background, and she didn't notice him at first. "You don't have to stay this late," he said finally. She didn't. "Look up, neither do you." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Fair enough." He walked closer, watching as she adjusted a part with slow, careful movements. "You're not just here for the job, are you?" Claire paused, her hands stilling for a moment before she resumed her work. "No," she admitted. "I'm here to prove to myself that I can walk into any room, any shop, any place, and not have to prove I belong. Just be there, because I've earned it." Lucas didn't reply right away, but something about her words lingered in the air between them. Outside, the city lights glimmered in the distance, but inside that quiet workshop, something had shifted, not just in the way Lucas saw her, but in the way the challenge they'd started with was slowly turning into something neither of them had expected, and though neither would say it out loud, they both knew this was only the beginning. The rain fell in a steady rhythm against the garage's wide glass windows, blurring the world outside into a wash of silver and gray inside. The hum of machinery and the faint scent of oil wrapped around Claire as she tightened the final bolts on a custom-built engine. Her fingers moved with the precision of someone who wasn't just repairing a machine, but coaxing it back to life. She was alone again. The others had left hours ago. Leaving the workshop in near silence, it had become her routine, staying late, taking on the projects no one wanted. It wasn't about impressing Lucas or earning anyone's respect. It was about the work itself, the quiet discipline it demanded, and the way it silenced the doubts that sometimes tried to creep in. But that night, she wasn't entirely alone. She sensed him before she heard him. The sound of careful footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. Claire straightened slowly, wiping her hands on a rag, and saw an older man standing in the shadows by the tool wall. His hair was silver at the temples, and his face carried the kind of lines that came from years of focus, not age. "You're working on the Greystone build?" he asked, his voice warm but tinged with curiosity. "I am," Claire replied. "Is that a problem?" The man shook his head. "No, most people won't touch that project. The wiring's a mess. The calibration's off, and the parts list is almost impossible to source. I've noticed," she said, setting the rag aside. "Doesn't mean it can't be fixed." A small smile crossed his face. "That's exactly what I used to say." He stepped closer, and the light caught the emblem stitched on the pocket of his jacket. The same emblem every senior mechanic in the garage wore, but his had an extra silver stripe above it. "I'm Daniel," he said, offering a hand. "I've been with this garage since before Lucas could drive." Claire shook his hand, feeling the rough texture of skin that had spent decades around tools and machines. "Claire," she said simply. "I know who you are," Daniel replied. "Word travels fast here, especially when someone walks in and does what you did with that Aston." Claire raised an eyebrow. "You mean when I embarrassed the boss in front of his entire crew?" Daniel chuckled. "I mean when you proved him wrong. That's not an easy thing to do. Lucas doesn't like being surprised." She tilted her head. "Do you?" "Depends on the surprise," Daniel said, his tone shifting to something quieter. "You've got talent, real talent, but talent alone doesn't survive in this place. You're going to need people who'll back you up when it gets rough." "Are you saying it's going to get rough?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced toward the glass office upstairs, where the lights were still on. A faint silhouette moved inside. Lucas, pacing slowly, phone in hand. "Let's just say," Daniel began, "that not everyone here wants you to succeed, and some of them will go further than you think to make sure you don't." Claire's grip on the rag tightened slightly. "Then I guess I'll just have to work harder. That's part of it," Daniel said. "The other part is knowing who you can trust and who you can't." There was a pause between them, the rain still pattering softly against the glass. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, studying her face as if searching for something. "Why are you really here, Claire? This isn't just about a paycheck. I've seen that look before, in people who've got something to prove, not to others." But to themselves, Claire hesitated. Her first instinct was to brush off the question, but something in Daniel's quiet steadiness made her answer honestly. Because for years, people told me where I didn't belong, and one day, I decided to stop listening. I'm here because I want to walk into a place like this and know I've earned my space, without anyone having to hand it to me. Daniel nodded, as if her words had confirmed something he'd already suspected. Then you're going to need more than skill. You're going to need patience, and maybe a friend. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Are you offering to be that friend? Daniel's mouth curved into the faintest of smiles. Maybe I already am. From that night on, Daniel started lingering in the workshop after hours. He didn't hover or give orders. Instead, he'd work on his own projects, occasionally drifting over to Claire's station with a suggestion or a tool she hadn't asked for, but always seemed to need. Sometimes they'd talk about old cars, rare parts, or the kind of engineering challenges that could make even seasoned mechanics lose sleep. Other times, they'd work in companionable silence. What Claire didn't realize was that Daniel had been quietly watching not just her skill, but the way she navigated the invisible politics of the garage. He saw how Ethan would accidentally misplace her tools, how Ryan would offer unsolicited corrections in front of others, how Lucas would occasionally test her by assigning impossible deadlines. And Daniel also noticed something else. She never broke. One Friday evening, as they were locking up, Daniel glanced at her and said, "You know, there's a race in 2 weeks. Not a public one. Invitation only. High stakes. Lucas has been preparing a car for it for months. If you can get on that project, it might be your chance to prove yourself to him in a way no one else here can." Claire considered it for a moment, then asked, "Why do you care if I prove myself to him?" Daniel's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Because sometimes the right person in the right place changes everything. And I think you might be that person." Claire didn't say it out loud, but she felt it too, the sense that this wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about something bigger, something she hadn't quite named yet. And somewhere upstairs, behind the glass, Lucas watched the two of them leave together, his expression unreadable, but his mind turning over possibilities he hadn't considered before. The morning of the race deadline arrived with a heavy stillness in the air, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Claire stood at her workbench, staring at the stripped-down chassis of the car Lucas had assigned her 2 days ago. A deep crimson Jaguar built for speed, but currently incapable of even starting. The hood was propped open, a tangle of wires and gleaming parts reflecting the harsh overhead lights. It was the first time she'd been trusted or tested with something of this scale. This wasn't just another repair. This was the race car Lucas had been fine-tuning for months. It was meant to be his statement at the upcoming private race, a gathering where reputations were made or destroyed in a single lap. The fact that he'd given it to her now could have meant one of two things. He was finally starting to believe in her, or he wanted to watch her fail in front of an audience. That mattered. Claire ran her hand lightly over the cool metal, her mind already tracing possible faults. She'd been through every basic diagnostic, every standard check, and still nothing. The engine refused to hold the power it needed. It would start, roar for a few seconds, then choke, shudder, and die. From the upper office, she could feel Lucas's gaze, though she didn't look up. He had been unusually quiet since handing her the project, and his silence weighed on her more than any criticism could have. Daniel approached from the far end of the garage, a cup of coffee in one hand and a grease rag in the other. He set the coffee down beside her without a word. "Still nothing?" he asked after a moment. "Still nothing," she admitted, tightening a bolt that was already tight just to keep her hands moving. "It's not the ignition, not the wiring, not the airflow. None of it makes sense." Daniel glanced at the car, then at her. "What if it's not a single problem?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" "What if it's 2 or 3 smaller faults layered on top of each other? Fixing one won't change anything unless you find them all." It was a possibility she hadn't wanted to consider. Triple faults meant triple the work, and with the deadline now less than 24 hours away, she didn't have the luxury of tearing everything down to the frame. But the way Daniel said it made her pause. She took a step back, letting her eyes travel over the entire car instead of focusing on one stubborn part. And that's when she saw it, a faint, almost invisible warping on the intake valve. It wasn't enough to stop the engine on its own, but it could throw off the balance if paired with other minor issues. Her pulse quickened. She moved quickly, now pulling apart the intake assembly and checking the fuel system again. Sure enough, the secondary fuel injector was delivering slightly less than optimal pressure, barely noticeable, but enough to matter. One problem left. She circled the car, crouching to inspect the undercarriage, her fingers tracing each line until she found it, a tiny hairline crack in the exhaust manifold. It wouldn't have been visible without the right light, and even then, most mechanics would have missed it. She straightened, her heart pounding. The three faults together created the perfect illusion, a car that should have been functional, but refused to perform. Fixing one wouldn't have changed a thing. It had to be all or nothing. The repairs took hours. She lost track of time, her focus narrowing until the world outside the car didn't exist. She could feel Daniel's presence nearby, occasionally handing her a tool before she even asked. Not a word passed between them during those last tense hours, but she knew he understood the stakes as much as she did. By the time the sun dipped low enough to cast golden light through the garage windows, the final bolt was in place. Claire wiped her hands on her overalls, took a steadying breath, and slid into the driver's seat. The smell of new parts and fresh fuel filled the air. Upstairs, Lucas appeared at the glass wall, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Claire turned the key. The engine roared to life, not with the uneven growl she'd heard before, but with a deep, steady power that sent vibrations through the floor. The sound filled the entire workshop, and for the first time in days, Claire allowed herself the smallest smile. She eased the accelerator, listening to the way the car responded, smooth, balanced, ready. When she looked up, Lucas was still watching. His gaze locked on her. There was no smirk this time, no trace of the amused arrogance she'd come to expect. Instead, there was something sharper, curiosity, maybe even respect. She stepped out of the car, meeting his eyes through the glass. Neither of them spoke, but the message was clear. She had passed another test, and this one had been far more than mechanical. Daniel clapped her lightly on the shoulder. Told you it was more than one problem, he said with a small grin. Claire glanced back at the car, its crimson paint catching the last rays of daylight. It always is, she murmured, and somewhere deep down, she knew the race wasn't going to be just about speed. It was going to be about proving, once and for all, that she belonged in this world, and maybe even changing it. The morning of the race arrived wrapped in a thin mist, the air crisp enough to sting the lungs. The private track lay just beyond a grove of tall pines, its smooth black asphalt gleaming faintly under the pale light of dawn. Rows of high-performance cars lined the pit area, their polished bodies reflecting the muted sky, their engines already growling in short, eager bursts. Claire stepped out of the trailer with her tool bag slung over her shoulder, the deep crimson Jaguar following behind on the ramp, its paint glowing like a heartbeat in the cool morning air. She could feel the eyes on her before she even looked up, the subtle weight of curiosity, skepticism, and the kind of silent judgment that didn't need words. Lucas was already there, standing near the pit wall in a black racing jacket that matched the sharp line of his jaw. His arms were folded, but his gaze was fixed on the Jaguar with the kind of intensity usually reserved for rivals. "You're early," he said as she approached. "You're welcome," Claire replied without breaking stride. His mouth twitched, as if fighting off a smile. "The driver will be here soon. Until then, you've got an hour to make sure this thing is flawless." "It's already flawless," she said, setting her bag down. "But I'll check again." As she worked, the sound of engines revving in the distance rose like a rolling wave. Wealthy owners and their crews moved about with calculated precision, each group surrounded by an air of quiet confidence. Claire kept her focus on the car, running her hands over every inch, tightening what didn't need tightening, checking what didn't need checking. She wasn't doing it for reassurance. She was doing it to keep her nerves from showing. Daniel appeared at her side, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're steady," he said, handing one to her. I have to be, she answered. He lowered his voice. This race isn't just about the car, Claire. These people, they're not just racing for fun. They're here for bragging rights, business deals, and reputation. If Lucas wins with this build, your name might start to matter in circles you've never even thought about. And if he loses, Daniel's eyes softened. Then you walk away knowing you did the best work you could. But you won't lose. The driver arrived, a tall, lean man in his early 40s with a face weathered by years of wind and speed. He nodded at Lucas, then looked at Claire. This the mechanic? She's the reason you'll be crossing the finish line, Lucas said simply. The driver raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Within minutes, he was suited up, helmet in hand, and climbing into the Jaguar. The purr of the engine rose as he started it, a sound so smooth and balanced it drew glances from other crews. Claire stepped back, feeling that familiar hum in her chest, the one that came from knowing she'd brought something to life that deserved to run. The cars lined up at the starting grid. The mist had begun to lift, revealing the sharp curves and long straights of the track ahead. Flags fluttered in the light breeze. The air was thick with exhaust and anticipation. Claire stood at the pit wall beside Lucas, her eyes fixed on the Jaguar. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3 engines screamed to life. The flag dropped. The pack surged forward, tires gripping the asphalt, each car fighting for position in the first bend. Claire's heart pounded with the rhythm of the race, her eyes darting between the Jaguar and the data screens showing speed, RPM, and lap time. At first, the Jaguar held steady in third place. The driver didn't push too hard, saving the car's power for when it would matter most. Claire noticed the other crews already shouting into headsets, urging their drivers to close gaps and block passes. By the third lap, the Jaguar had moved into second. The leader, a low, jet black McLaren, was fast, but Claire could see it in the telemetry. The McLaren was burning more fuel than it should. It was pushing too early. She leaned toward Lucas. Tell him to wait until lap 6. The McLaren won't hold this pace. Lucas didn't hesitate. He relayed the message, his voice calm and measured. Lap 6 came, and as predicted, the McLaren began to falter just enough for the Jaguar to close the gap. The driver made his move. On the final stretch before the long curve, the roar of the Crimson engine overtaking the McLaren's scream. The crowd's reaction was instant, a surge of cheers and disbelief as the Jaguar claimed the lead. Claire's pulse quickened, her hands gripping the edge of the wall. Every second felt like its own battle now. The other cars pressed hard from behind, but the Jaguar held its line, corner after corner, straight after straight. And then, the final lap. Claire could hear nothing but the deep growl of the car as it tore past the pit wall for the last time. The driver pushed through the final curve, the tires gripping with perfect precision, the engine answering every demand without hesitation. When the Jaguar crossed the finish line first, the sound that followed was unlike anything Claire had heard before. Part applause, part engine thunder, part disbelief from those who never thought she could be part of this victory. Lucas turned to her. There was no smirk, no arrogance, only a slow, deliberate nod. You built a winner. Claire allowed herself the smallest of smiles. We built a winner. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was more than just a race. This was the moment everything shifted. The victory celebrations had faded into the soft hum of late evening. The track was empty now, save for the last few crews packing up their equipment under the glow of tall floodlights. Claire stood by the Crimson Jaguar, her hand resting lightly on the hood, still warm from the run. The air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of fuel and rubber. But there was something else lingering, the unshakable feeling that this day had changed everything. Lucas was silent as he approached. He'd spent most of the last hour in conversations with sponsors, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. But his eyes kept drifting back to her. Now, away from the noise, he stopped just a few feet from her, the weight of the moment hanging between them. You kept your word, Claire said softly, breaking the silence. He studied her, his expression unreadable. I said if you could fix it, I'd marry you. I didn't think you'd make it sound so easy. It wasn't easy, she replied. You just didn't see the parts that weren't. There was a pause, and for the first time, Lucas's usual confidence seemed tempered by something quieter. "When I made that bet, I thought I was setting you up to fail. Not because I didn't think you had skill, but because I didn't think anyone could handle that car. I was wrong." Claire met his gaze, her voice steady. "You weren't just wrong about the car." His lips curved faintly, almost like a surrender. "No, I wasn't." From the shadows near the pit entrance, Daniel appeared, carrying a small folder under his arm. He approached with that familiar calm of his, but his eyes held a knowing glint. "Before you just start rewriting history, there's something you should see." He handed Lucas the folder. Inside was a set of photographs, the Jaguar's engine before Claire had touched it. Close-up shots of the 3 separate faults she'd found. On the back of one photo was a date. "A date from months ago. You knew?" Claire asked Daniel. "I suspected," he said simply. "But the point wasn't whether the car could be fixed. The point was whether you'd find what everyone else missed." Lucas looked up from the photos. "And she did." Daniel nodded once, then turned to leave, his role in the day's story complete. For a long moment, Lucas and Claire stood in silence. The track lights cast a pale glow on the asphalt, and somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of a generator hummed. "So," Lucas said at last, his voice low but certain. "About that promise," Claire crossed her arms, not in defiance, but in the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove herself. "You don't owe me anything, Lucas. Not a job, not a title, not a marriage." He took a step closer. "Maybe not, but maybe I want to keep it anyway." Her breath caught for just a moment, but she didn't let it show. "You want to marry someone because she fixed your car?" He shook his head slowly. "No, I want to marry someone who doesn't back down, even when I've given her every reason to. Someone who sees what's broken and doesn't stop until it works again, whether it's a machine, a challenge, or a person." The air between them was different now. The sharp edges of arrogance had worn down into something steadier, something real. Claire looked at the Jaguar, then back at Lucas. "Then you'll have to prove you deserve me." For the first time, his smile was genuine. "That's fair." They walked back toward the trailers together, the Jaguar behind them like a silent witness to everything that had unfolded. The mist had returned, curling low along the ground, softening the edges of the night. Somewhere deep inside, Claire knew that her journey wasn't ending here. It was only just beginning. The race had been a victory, but the real win was something far greater, earning her place on her own terms in a world that had once shut its doors to her. And as they left the empty track, the sound of the engine from earlier still echoed in her mind, steady, powerful, unstoppable, because so was she.